Let's start with something bold. Most people are completely wrong about what women actually want. For decades, size has been exaggerated, misunderstood, and turned into a source of anxiety, insecurity, and misinformation. But when we strip away myths and look at real scientific research, a very different and surprisingly reassuring picture emerges. Today, we're going to break this down with clarity, honesty, and evidence, because when it comes to sexual health, facts matter far more than fear. What if everything you've been worrying about was never actually a problem? What if the pressure, the comparison, the silent insecurity, it's all built on a myth that doesn't even reflect reality? This is where everything shifts. You are already enough, and that's not just a motivational phrase, it's backed by real-world evidence and human experience. The idea that you need to meet some exaggerated standard has been pushed by media, unrealistic portrayals, and constant comparison. But when you strip all of that away, what remains is something far more empowering. Most people are not looking for extremes, they're looking for comfort, connection, and authenticity. Think about this. How often have you compared yourself to something that isn't even real? Images, stories, or expectations that are designed to capture attention, not reflect truth. That comparison creates a gap in your mind, a feeling that you're somehow lacking. But that gap is artificial. It was created, not discovered. Here's the truth that changes everything. Normal is not a weakness. Normal is what actually works. When you understand that, the pressure starts to fade. You stop chasing something unrealistic and start appreciating what you already have. And here, where it gets even more powerful, confidence doesn't come from changing yourself to fit a false standard. It comes from realizing you never needed to. When you accept that you are already within the range of what is desired and satisfying, your mindset shifts. You move differently. You think differently. You show up with a presence that can't be faked. Ask yourself this: what would happen if you stopped worrying about not being enough? What would change in the way you carry yourself, the way you interact, the way you connect with someone else? That freedom, that ease, that confidence, it becomes your advantage. Because the reality is, people respond to energy, to comfort, to authenticity. When you're not trapped in your own head, when you're not constantly measuring yourself against some invisible standard, you become more present, more engaged, more real. And that's what creates meaningful experiences, not perfection, but presence. The moment you internalize that you are already enough, you take back control. You stop letting external noise define your self-worth. You stop chasing validation and start embodying it. And once that shift happens, everything else begins to align naturally. What if the thing you've been focusing on the most is actually the least important part? What if the real secret to deep satisfaction isn't perfection at all, but something far more human, more powerful, and more within your control? Connection changes everything. In a world obsessed with performance and unrealistic expectations, people often forget what truly drives meaningful intimacy. It's not about getting everything right in some technical or physical sense. It's about how safe, understood, and connected someone feels in your presence. That emotional layer, the one you can't measure, is where real impact happens. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever been in a situation where everything looked perfect on the surface, but something still felt missing? That missing piece is often connection. Because without it, even the most ideal scenario can feel empty, mechanical, or forgettable. Now flip that idea. When there is genuine connection, when there is trust, comfort, and emotional openness, even imperfections fade into the background. Small flaws don't matter. Awkward moments don't break the experience. Instead, they often make it more real, more human, and more memorable. Here's the truth most people overlook. The brain is the most powerful part of attraction and satisfaction. Emotional engagement, feeling desired, feeling heard, these create a much deeper and longer-lasting impact than any form of physical perfection ever could. And yet, so many people chase perfection. They try to meet impossible standards, thinking that's the key to being desired. But in doing so, they often lose the very thing that matters most. They become less present, more anxious, more focused on themselves than on the shared experience. Connection requires the opposite. It requires presence. It requires attention. It requires you to actually tune into the other person, what they're feeling, what they're responding to, what makes them comfortable. Ask yourself this: when someone feels completely at ease with you, when they feel they can be themselves without judgment, doesn't that instantly deepen the experience? That sense of emotional safety builds trust. And trust opens the door to more honesty, more communication, and ultimately more satisfaction. Another powerful shift happens when you stop chasing perfection. You start listening more. You become curious instead of performative. You pay attention to subtle cues, reactions, and feedback. And that awareness allows you to respond in a way that feels natural and genuine, not forced. Because real connection is not about impressing someone, it's about understanding them. And when that understanding is there, everything else starts to flow more effortlessly. The pressure fades. The need to prove yourself disappears. What replaces it is something far more impactful: authentic engagement. This is why connection consistently outweighs perfection, because perfection is static, rigid, and often unrealistic. Connection is dynamic, adaptable, and deeply human. When you focus on building that connection, you're no longer trying to meet an external standard. You're creating an experience that is unique, mutual, and genuinely fulfilling. What if the single biggest thing holding you back isn't your body, your ability, or your knowledge, but your mindset? What if the difference between an average experience and an unforgettable one comes down to one powerful factor: confidence? Confidence changes everything, not in a loud, arrogant, or showy way, but in a quiet, grounded, undeniable presence. It's the difference between overthinking every move and simply being in the moment. It's the shift from questioning yourself to trusting yourself. Think about this. Have you ever noticed how someone who is confident immediately feels more attractive, more engaging, more magnetic? It's not because they are perfect. It's because they are comfortable in their own skin. That comfort creates ease, and that ease creates connection. Now flip that idea. When confidence is missing, what happens? Doubt creeps in. You start analyzing yourself. You hesitate. You disconnect from the moment because your mind is busy judging instead of experiencing. And that internal noise doesn't just stay inside. It shows in your body language, your energy, your presence. Here's the powerful truth: confidence is not about being flawless. It's about being relaxed with who you are. It's about accepting yourself fully without constantly trying to measure up to something unrealistic. And here, where it becomes transformational, when you feel confident, you naturally become more attentive. You listen better. You respond better. You're not stuck in your head, so you're able to focus on the other person, to understand them, to adapt, to connect. That's where real quality comes from. Ask yourself this: what would change if you stopped doubting yourself in those moments? What if instead of worrying about how you're being perceived, you focused entirely on the experience itself? That shift alone can completely transform the outcome. Confidence also creates a sense of safety. When you are comfortable with yourself, the other person feels it. They feel more relaxed, more open, more willing to engage. Confidence isn't just something you feel, it's something others experience from you. And the most important part: confidence is something you build, not something you're born with. It comes from understanding, from self-acceptance, from letting go of unrealistic expectations and embracing reality. Every time you choose to trust yourself instead of criticize yourself, you strengthen it. Because at the end of the day, people don't connect with perfection. They connect with authenticity. And confidence is what allows that authenticity to show. What if the biggest advantage you could ever have isn't something you're born with, but something you can learn? What if the real difference between an average experience and an exceptional one has nothing to do with physical traits and everything to do with skill? Skill changes the game. For so long, people have been told to focus on what they have instead of what they can do. But when you look at real human experiences, a completely different pattern appears. Technique, awareness, communication, these are the factors that consistently create better outcomes. Think about this. Have you ever seen someone succeed not because they had the best natural ability, but because they understood how to use what they had effectively. That's the power of skill. It turns something ordinary into something impactful. Now apply that idea here. When someone is attentive, when they take the time to understand what works and what doesn't, when they adjust based on feedback, they create a far more satisfying experience than someone who relies purely on physical attributes. Here's the truth most people overlook. No two individuals are exactly the same. Preferences vary. Comfort levels vary. What feels good to one person may not feel the same to another. That's why skill matters so much. It allows you to adapt. Ask yourself this: would you rather rely on something fixed, something you can't change, or something you can continuously improve and refine? Skill gives you control. It gives you the ability to grow, to learn, to get better over time. And here, where it becomes even more powerful, skill is deeply connected to awareness. It's about paying attention to subtle cues, body language, reactions. It's about being present enough to notice what's working and what is. That level of attentiveness creates a sense of care and effort that cannot be faked. When someone feels that you are genuinely tuned in, that you're not just going through the motions but actually responding to them, it changes the entire experience. It becomes more engaging, more dynamic, more personal. Another key part of skill is communication. Being open, asking, listening, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs of confidence and maturity. They show that you care about creating a shared experience, not just focusing on yourself. And here's the shift that most people never make. Instead of trying to impress, they start trying to understand. That single change in mindset transforms everything. Because when you focus on skill, you remove the pressure of perfection. You're no longer trying to meet some unrealistic standard. You're focused on learning, improving, and connecting. Skill is flexible. It evolves. It adapts to different situations, different people, different dynamics. And that adaptability is what makes it so powerful. So instead of worrying about what you can't change, start focusing on what you can develop. Because the ability to learn, to adjust, and to grow will always be more valuable than any fixed attribute. What if the pressure you feel isn't coming from reality at all? What if it's coming from constant comparison to things that were never meant to represent real life? What if the moment you stop comparing is the moment everything finally feels easier? Comparison is one of the fastest ways to destroy confidence. From a young age, people are exposed to exaggerated standards, images, stories, and portrayals that are designed to grab attention, not reflect truth. Over time, these unrealistic benchmarks start to feel normal, and without even realizing it, you begin measuring yourself against them. But here, the problem, those comparisons are fundamentally flawed. They are often edited, selective, or completely unrealistic. They highlight extremes, not averages. They show performance, not authenticity. And when you compare yourself to something like that, you're setting yourself up for unnecessary doubt. Think about this. How often have you questioned yourself after seeing something online or hearing someone else's experience? That moment of doubt doesn't come from your reality. It comes from an external narrative that you've allowed to influence your perception. Now imagine removing that influence. Imagine what would happen if you stopped measuring yourself against others altogether. If you stopped asking, "Am I as good as that?" and started asking, "Am I present, engaged, and improving?" That shift in focus changes everything. Because the truth is, comparison pulls you out of the moment. It puts your attention on yourself in a negative way. You start analyzing, judging, second-guessing. And when your mind is occupied like that, you're no longer fully engaged in the experience. Presence disappears. And without presence, connection weakens. Here's something powerful to understand. Every person, every interaction, every experience is different. There is no universal standard that applies perfectly to everyone. What works in one situation may not work in another. That's why comparison doesn't just hurt your confidence. It also limits your ability to adapt and respond naturally. Ask yourself this: what are you really gaining from comparing yourself? Does it improve your ability to connect? Does it make you more confident, more relaxed, more aware? Or does it create tension, pressure, and self-doubt? Most of the time, it's the latter. Letting go of comparison doesn't mean you stop growing. It means you stop growing in the wrong direction. Instead of trying to match someone else's experience, you focus on your own development. You pay attention to what works for you, what feels right, what creates a better connection. And here, where the real shift happens, when you stop comparing, you start accepting. And when you start accepting, you naturally become more confident. Not because you've changed something externally, but because you've changed how you see yourself. That internal shift is powerful. Because when you're not constantly measuring yourself against others, you free up mental space. Space to be present. Space to connect. Space to actually enjoy the experience instead of evaluating it. And once you experience that level of freedom, you begin to realize something important. Most of the pressure you felt was never necessary in the first place. What if the real advantage isn't what you know right now, but how willing you are to keep learning? What if the people who create the most fulfilling experiences aren't the most naturally gifted, but the ones who stay curious, open, and committed to growth? Growth changes everything. Many people fall into a fixed mindset. They believe things are either good or not good, as if ability is something permanent. That belief creates pressure, because if something doesn't go perfectly, it feels like failure. But when you shift into a learning mindset, everything becomes an opportunity instead of a judgment. Think about this. What happens when you approach any experience with curiosity instead of expectation? You start observing more. You start noticing details you would normally miss. You become more aware, more responsive, more engaged. And that awareness naturally leads to improvement. Now imagine applying that consistently. Instead of trying to prove yourself, you focus on understanding. You ask questions, verbally or non-verbally. You pay attention to feedback, to reactions, to subtle changes. Every moment becomes information. And the more information you gather, the better you become. Here's the truth most people overlook. No one starts out knowing everything. Skill, awareness, and confidence are built over time. The difference is that some people are willing to learn, while others stay stuck trying to appear perfect. Ask yourself this: would you rather look perfect for a moment or actually improve over time? Because growth requires humility. It requires you to accept that there is always more to learn. But that's not a weakness, it's a massive strength. It keeps you adaptable. It keeps you evolving. It keeps you from becoming rigid or predictable. Another powerful aspect of growth is communication. Being open to learning means being open to listening. It means valuing the other person's experience, not just your own assumptions. That kind of openness builds trust and creates a more collaborative dynamic. And when both people feel heard and understood, the experience becomes deeper, more connected, more meaningful. Here, where it becomes transformational, growth builds confidence, but in a very different way. Not the kind of confidence that comes from thinking you already know everything, but the kind that comes from knowing you can handle anything because you're willing to learn and adapt. That type of confidence is stable. It doesn't break under pressure because it's not based on perfection. It's based on progress. Think about how powerful that is. Instead of fearing mistakes, you use them. Instead of avoiding challenges, you learn from them. Every experience, good or bad, adds to your understanding. And over time, that accumulated knowledge creates a level of skill and awareness that can't be faked. Because growth is not about reaching a final destination. It's about continuously becoming better, more aware, more connected, and more capable with every experience you have.